Hey patrons, welcome back to the second part in this tutorial series, and in this part we're going to be focusing on drawing the nose. And so in the first part we've done the eyes, and because the nose hasn't got as many dark shadows as the eye has, we aren't going to be using too much of the 2B charcoal pencil. We're mainly going to be using the extra hard one. So I'm going to be going in with this first, and I'm just going to block in the darkest areas, which are the nostrils. So I'm just going to very lightly add this. I'm going to add more layering and more shading where it's slightly darker. Very lightly shade where the darkest areas are. So just add a little bit of shading on this side as well. Okay, so now I'm going to lightly go over it with the brush and just start to add some value on the other areas of the nose. I'm going to leave out this area at the moment because of the fact that this area is quite a bright highlight. So I'm going to avoid adding too much of this shadow and shading too much charcoal on that area for now. But I'm going to add it to all of these other little areas. I've already added in the sketch outline so we know where the contours and shadows need to be. You can build up more and more of the shadow, so for now I know this is a bit too light still, but you can build up more and more shadow. I'm just sort of starting off lightly and then we can build up to those darker areas. Just adding a foundation layer for now. So I am going to add a bit of charcoal to just a sheet of paper and just mix the paintbrush in that just to get some more shadowed value. So just to get some more charcoal on the brush, and then I'm just applying this for those darker areas. Just painting it on. Very much like you would paint, just dust it on and blend it in. There's a little bit of highlight between this really dark shadow here and the shadow that we're adding, so I'm just not going all the way to the edge just to give that natural lighter look. And it's these little subtle changes of values that you need to make yourself aware of. So adding the soft shadow above the nostril, again there is that thin bit of highlight, so I'm not going to take this shadow all of the way up to this one. Because this is watercolour paper that I'm using, there is a bit more texture to it than my Strathmore Bristol Smooth one that I usually use. And I find that this little bit of texture gives more of an uneven look to the skin. It's not completely smooth, which I feel helps with the realism, because the skin isn't like ultimately really airbrushed. There is still a bit of texture to it, so I think this paper helps to give that natural look of texture without it being too textured. So really take your time with this. Dip the paintbrush back into the charcoal powder that I've created. So there's this sort of dark shadow in line with the eyes. You can go and freshen up the highlights and lighten them up a bit more after you've done all of these areas. I'm going to go in a bit with the extra hard charcoal pencil and just start to shade on some of these darker areas. Very lightly shading this area now. So now I'm going to do the shadows underneath the nose. So add more shading for the nostril and underneath the nose. Just adding some shading for the top of the lip. Okay, now I'm going to go in with my blending stump and just blend this out. Pretty much going in circular motions, or just sweep it using the side of the blending stump. Just lightly blend over everywhere. Just adding some blending and some shading for this side of the skin, this side of the face that's meeting with the nose. And this area is in a bit of shadow, so I'm just adding some shading with the blending stump to this area to darken it up. Create a nice contrast against the nose. Just blend over everywhere lightly, and as you can see, everywhere's got a bit darker and value's been spread everywhere, but it's a lot softer now. I'm just going to blend some of this value up here. I'm leaving this area because that's where the hair is going. Bringing the charcoal down the side of the face here so it's easier to judge the values. Adding some darker shading to the nostril. I'm just using the blending stump now just to really contour the nose, get in those darker shadows where they need to be. Before we go in and add the highlights, I want to make sure all of the shadows are nice and accurate. Do need to darken up this area. Like I said, it's better to start off light and then have to keep going in and darkening stuff up than going too dark at the start, because it is more difficult to erase charcoal than it is graphite. Now I'm going to add again some more shading with the 2H hard charcoal pencil. And I'm also going to block in some of these hairs so I know where they go. Going in with this charcoal as well. Just going to blend over this with the blending stump. Switch over to the 2H, carry on adding some of this shadow, some of this shading. So now that I've just added the shading with the charcoal pencil again, I'm just going to go in with the tissue and soften it out. It doesn't take very long to blend with the tissue because of the fact that it covers such a large area quite quickly. And then once again, I'm just going to go back in with that pencil just to get in those darkest points. Just those couple of areas. Just keep building and building it up. Until you got everywhere dark enough. I'm only adding the direct charcoal on the darkest areas, otherwise you're just going to get too much of a grainy look if you use it on areas that are a bit too light. Just darken up this area. Go back in and blend it out. You can blend it out with the blending stump if you want it to be a bit darker. That's a bit too dark, so I'm going back in with the tissue. So I'm just fixing the values for the skin around the nose as well. There we go, so blended over the whole area. One last time I'm just going to darken up the nostrils. And a couple of these other areas. There we go. And so now I'm just going to go in with my Tombow Mono Eraser and just use this to start to add the highlights. So I'm just going to tap it on there because they are very sort of like dotty. Also add some of these little highlights. Really just want to get a good contrast on the nose. Some highlights aren't as bright as others. Okay, so I'm just going to add a highlight going around the bottom of the nose. I'm looking for these subtle little highlights. Subtle highlights. You don't just have to use this eraser just to add the brightest ones. You can use it just to add some of the more subtle highlights as well, and the lightest values on the area you're working on. And also just to add some texture throughout the nose. I'm going to go in with a clean part of the tissue just to actually lighten up some of these areas. And smooth it out a little bit. I'm actually going to erase more of this area just to create a more intense highlight. I'm just going to blend over it with some tissue again. Going in again now, adding a few more shadows with the 2B pencil, the darker charcoal this time. Just adjusting the shape of the nose. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for the nose for now. Just going to quickly add in some of the brightest areas. Just press a bit harder just to get them all blocked in and nice and bright. Okay, but that is it for the nose, and I'll see you in the next part where we're going to be working on the mouth. Bye guys.